Welcome back to the One Way podcast, where we explore the disciplines, mindsets, and practices that help us grow as martial artists and as people. Today, we are honored to sit down with Dr. Cheryl Rock, a respected expert in health and nutrition, whose work bridges science, lifestyle, and long-term wellness. In the martial arts world, we talk a lot about discipline, consistency, and intentional living. Dr. Rock brings a perspective that connects those values directly to how we fuel our bodies, how we recover, and how we build sustainable habits that support both performance and everyday life. Whether you're a competitor, a parent, a coach, or someone simply trying to live a healthier life, this conversation is packed with insight you can apply immediately. Dr. Rock is part of the Association of Women Martial Arts Instructors. Dr. Rock is a 4th degree black belt in Hapkido, a 4th stripe white belt in BJJ. She also enjoys playing the violin. She leads study abroad trips to Barbados, and you can find out more about Dr. Rock, the Renaissance Sensei, at healthyhughesfitness.com. But we're going to share a little bit of that information in our episode today. So without further ado, let's get started. Dr. Cheryl Rock, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I know it's early out there, so we really appreciate your time. I guess for our first question, it might make sense to get into the foundations of nutrition. So before we get into that, do you want to share anything specific about yourself that maybe we didn't cover in the intro, or just greet our audience?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So thank you, Jesse, and thank you, John, for inviting me to this podcast. I'm really, really excited to share more about what I know about nutrition and food science. So basically, I'm a food scientist, and I'm also a nutritionist. So I teach food science and nutrition at California State, Long Beach, and most of my students were within the College of Health and Human Services. So this is auspicious as to where my credence in food science and nutrition really aligns with martial arts. That's where my passion began. And so my area of expert, particularly in food science, is nutritional biochemistry, which focuses on how medicines and plants or colors of food affect the progression of various diseases such as cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and how they're mitigated. And then I also got into looking at how antioxidants work in terms of neutralizing free radicals that are formed in the body, especially during training, and also to I guess dismiss or demystify common food myths. I teach a very unique class called Franking Food, Fat or Science Fiction, where I challenge students in particular to focus on looking at the peer review literatures rather than gathering information from all over the web, random information. So we look at how science, evidence-based research informed them on how to make decisions about the food they eat before making different choices. So as you can see, I have a plethora of experiences in the food science and nutrition field. I also advise and work a lot with students who are pursuing status in to be a registered dietitian nutritionist. So a lot of my work revolves around research, looking at pathways that different compounds in foods can help when it comes to either mitigating or preventing chronic illnesses. So I just wanted to give the lay of the land before I begin to talk.
Yeah, that's awesome. So it looks like the first thing here is our foundations of nutrition. So as somebody who is actively training, one of the questions that I often have before training and after training is, what should I be doing? Like in terms of eating, so sometimes after training, my body will just be craving something, right? And I'm like, all right, let me just try to get as close as I can to what I think I need right now. But when it comes to the foundations of nutrition, for people who are actively training and regularly training, what do you feel are some of the most important nutritional fundamentals they should understand?
Yeah, so that's a very important question. So I think really to address what are the basic fundamentals of nutrition first, before I address the specifics about pre-training,
Mm.
during training, and after training. So basically, universally, everyone should consume at least six basic nutrients. These are the carbohydrates, these are the proteins, these are the fats. These are called macronutrients, and this is where your energy comes from. So if you think
Mm.
of a vehicle, it has to have fuel to move. And so our bodies are like that. If we don't have the fuel, we will not be able to move. So you need those macronutrients. They're called macronutrients because you require a larger amount of them. Then the other three is the other two classes is the micronutrients. So you have vitamins and minerals. They're called micronutrients because they are required in smaller amounts as compared to the macronutrients. And then you have water, which is also a basic food
Mm.
too as well, even though it's not actually food, but it helps with the transportation of nutrients around the body. So you mentioned like hydration earlier, and so that's really the fundamental basis. So having a knowledge of how much of those nutrients are required in those particular basic six food groups are really, really important. And then knowing how to balance them. So you have to have adequate amounts of them. They must be varied, must be balanced, and
Mm.
you have to consume some in moderation. So I think that's the fundamentals of really like you have to know how much of those macronutrients you do need, how much those micronutrients you do need. Now, these can vary based on your age now, because
Mm.
younger kids, they require energy because they're growing, and older adults we require more of the micronutrients because our bone density is changing and stuff like that. So depending on which age group you're in, you would have a nutritionist or a registered dietitian, more specifically registered dietitian who specialize in sports nutrition to really give you the amount that you require. So that's the first basis, knowing the six basic nutrients and then being able to balance them. So that's the
Mm.
first question.
Mm.
That's the first part I'd like to address. Now, when you think about pre-workout, during workout, after workout, obviously, like I mentioned, you need fuel, right? So when you think of pre-workout, you think of carbohydrates. That's the body's main fuel or the preferred um, type of fuel that your body needs. Body loves glucose. That's why when you're hungry or you feel like lethargic, you may eat something or drink something sweet. You feel like a sugar high.
Mm.
Well, the carbohydrates is the first preferred nutrient that your body will crave because that's the major fuel, right? So carbohydrate. Then when you're training, of course, you can hydrate because your body needs to, flush out some toxins and stuff like that. Keep the blood flowing because the
Mm.
blood is the main vehicle for transporting oxygen to increase your performance and stuff like that. And then after you work out, you would need to really focus on the protein because after workout, the inevitable is that you get, whether you want it or not, you have muscle injury, so you need protein to kind of activate that
Mm.
repair after training, and then also antioxidants, which is found in the colorful fruits and vegetables, because those help neutralize any inflammation that would have formed while you were working. Now, inflammation is essential for the body to function, but if you produce too much inflammation, that can result in muscle injury and also off balance the biochemistry of your body. So you need something to balance out or to neutralize those oxidants, which is called antioxidants. And so those really help with recovery and recouping so that you can perform the next day. So I hope that basic outline answered your question in terms of like what are the basic fundamentals in terms of the basic nutrients, but what you should consider, especially when you are starting to work out. Um, so 2 to 3 hours before you work out, you should eat, a carb load. Like I said, there are different requirements for different athletes
Mm.
based on if they're endurance athlete or if they're a strength athlete, and that also includes protein as well. So if you're an ordinary person who is very sedentary, maybe about 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. If you are an endurance athlete or endurance, trainer, maybe 1.2 to 1.4 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. And if you are a strength athlete, lifting weights and stuff, of course, 1.4 to 1.6 grams per kilogram body weight. So it just varies depending on the level of activity that you're looking at, and your performance goals, strength, your performance goals, the athlete or martial artist. So I hope that wasn't too advanced, but I can break it down a
Oh,
little bit better.
that was great. It's nice to kind of see some of that stuff broken down.
Hmm.
The food pyramid has changed a little bit over the years. What are your thoughts on that? It sounds like you have a more tailored approach to nutrition, which is good. Should people be wary of just kind of taking the food pyramid as it is?
Yes and no. I feel like the food, of course, we need tools. Tools is something that are frameworks. Okay, frameworks are established, or think of like a house. A house needs a framework, the cornerstone or something to help it stand up. And so same thing with the nutrition. You have to have frameworks that establish guidelines. And um, the food pyramid or food requirements have changed, have evolved over the years. So it was food pyramid, then it went to like my plate, which was just I think I did a seminar on that last year at the UMaHof conference, where I focused on looking at the five components of a plate, which included your fruits, vegetables, grains, proteins, and like dairy, and they have various amounts. So like even the food pyramid, it looks like, like a triangle that will have the proportions of what you need. So I would say just knowing the basic fundamentals of the six nutrients, so the carbohydrates, fats, proteins, vitamins, and minerals, they all fall into that. Like think of your my plate. I think a plate is more relatable than a pyramid because we see
Mm,
plates all the time.
Hmm.
And that's just my personal opinion. And then if you divide the plate into like four sectors, you have half the plate that's fruits and vegetables, and then half the plate that is grains and proteins, and then you have like a cup that has some dairy or non-dairy or dairy-like product. So that makes it simple for someone to understand. And so the average person might the dietary requirements for universally is based on a 2,000 calorie diet. So you will see on your food labels, you will see this product has been, the nutritional facts label has been
Hmm.
formulated according to 2,000 calorie diet. So that would be equivalent to having like 2 cups of fruit, whether it's whole fruit, canned fruit, or the fruit juice. Then you might have maybe 3 cups of vegetables,
mm,
and that could be either leafy greens or starchy vegetable. Then you have like whole grains like rice, couscous, stuff like that. That could be about 6 ounces, and then you have like the protein-based foods like fish, egg, maybe like some beans and stuff, maybe 5 ounces of that, and then of course the last is 3 cups of dairy. So these are within the six basic nutrients that you require. They come from those five different categories of foods on your plate. So fruits, vegetable, grains, protein, and dairy. And the amount I just mentioned is based on a 2,000 calorie diet, which is standardized for healthy adults
Hmm.
within the US. Sometimes you might see the nutritional facts label provide discretionary for calories for 2,500 calorie diet, but most of the food labels are standardized according to 2,000 calorie diet. Why? Because minimum, that's what most people might be able to consume in a day. But of course, athletes might consume like I feel like athletes like say Michael Phelps, he's a swimmer, so he might consume 7,000 calories. Well, he's swimming all day long. He needs the energy. He's not sedentary to sitting there, hanging out. He needs that amount of calories to burn. Um,
I
so
think.
yeah, I feel like the food pyramid, the my plate, these have been frameworks that have been, oscillated or shifted around among the years. just based on different policies, because everything is the guidelines for nutrition is based on the guidelines for healthy Americans based on nutrition policies. And so as long as they're providing for me, like, what are the major nutrients, the carbohydrates,
Mm.
fats, vitamins, minerals, water, and then how are you receiving those nutrients from rich food groups, fruits, vegetables, grains, proteins, and dairy. I think that is very fundamental. That's very important to understand. So tools are very important. I hope that addresses your question.
Yeah, yeah. So also going back a step, you talked a lot about carbohydrates and the need for those for athletes, which I think is great. It seems to not be a popular take these days. A lot of people are trying to get away from carbohydrates, go just all protein. And um, I have actually had a competitor the other day at a tournament who looked like he had no energy at all. And I have a suspicion that his family has like a no carbohydrates kind of rule. Um, and so my thought is the reason why you're recommending all those carbohydrates for athletes is to get that energy?
Yeah, so energy comes from the carbohydrates, the proteins, and the fats mainly, the macronutrients. Each of those macronutrients have different functions. So protein is mainly for repair.
Mm.
Um, the
Mm.
fat maybe for like keeping you warm and storing the fat soluble vitamins and stuff like that and protecting your organs. And the carbohydrate is for your main fuel. So it's like you putting diesel in a gasoline tank, like like it's just in that. So this is where a lot of the misconceptions about carbohydrates. Now, that's why I mentioned adequate, varied, balance, and moderation, because obviously if you eat too much carbohydrate, and there's different kinds of carbohydrate, there's simple sugars like
Mm.
sucrose and glucose, and then there's starchy starch, like like the flour and all that kind of stuff that you will find in like bread and like sugar baked goods and stuff like that. So there are different kinds of carbohydrates, and there's different kinds of carbohydrates that can cause problems because they cause insulin insensitivity, insulin resistance in some people, which can result in type 2 diabetes, right? So if you're overdoing it, obviously there'll be some harm. Anything that is good, if you overdo it, it can cause harm. You need sunlight for vitamin D
Mm.
conversion.
Right.
But if you stay, what you get skin cancer, right? Salt is important for your heart to beat, but if you eat too much salt, you get hypertension. So there's a lot of misconceptions, especially revolving around carbohydrate, because it has been affiliated with like obesity and type 2 diabetes. But if you are someone who's very active, you're going to burn that carbohydrate off because your body is using it as fuel.
Mm.
And if you're eating the right carbohydrate, that would um, regulate the amount of insulin you release. That can also help with you reducing the risk of becoming insulin resistant. And so just knowing what type of carbohydrate to eat and how much to eat is going to be very, very important. Now, if you don't eat carbohydrate at all, your body will still get energy, but it has to pull from resources like the protein. And that's a really bad that's
Mm.
very harmful,
Mm.
because when you start utilizing energy from protein, then your body becomes, it can result in a condition called, um, ketoacidosis, which makes your blood very acidic. That can result in like nerve damage and
Mm.
all that
Mm.
kind of stuff, which can cause various issues, obviously, for persons. That's why, like with the person who's diabetic, they have to make sure that they're regulating the sugars and stuff, because they don't have the insulin. The insulin does not allow. Think of a key of a door. The insulin goes in the keyhole, unlocks the cell, and the cell opens up, and the sugar goes in. Your body uses it. But if you don't have the key to unlock the door, the sugar sits in the blood, and the body still needs energy. So it has to pull from the protein, which causes the
Mm.
blood to become
Mm.
acidic, and that's where they might get like nerve damage, they begin to lose limbs and stuff like
Wow.
that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I've never heard it described like that. Diabetes has been something, and there are different types, but that the way that you just painted that picture, sometimes so part of why that struck me so much is sometimes nutrition feels a little mystifying, right? And it's ironic because these are things that we really need, like there's so much in the world around us that we don't really need. But we need to eat right, we need to drink right, and we need to take care of our bodies, right? And the there's sort of a conundrum here, I think, for people and myself included, up until these past couple of years where I've been digging into this a little bit more. People seem to want a checklist, right? They say, okay, well, my body's not feeling great. Give me a checklist, give me the answer, and then I will eat that every single day for the rest of my life. But you open this conversation, Dr. Rock, by reminding us that that's not that easy. Our bodies are always changing, and what we need as a child is going to be different than what we need as an adolescent, going through puberty and then coming up, into early adulthood and so on and so forth, right? It's constantly changing. And I was curious to know, that can be overwhelming for some people. There are people in my life who I will maybe start the nutrition conversation with, and they feel overwhelmed. They feel, well, how am I supposed to keep track of all of this? And then there's apps and there's all these answers. The point that I'm getting to here is, we recently, I met you for the first time at the UMAHA, the Universal Martial Arts Hall of Fame down in Texas, and you led this wonderful workshop. And actually, you're wearing a shirt today from that workshop, the Chocolate Meditation, that was in part about mindfully eating. And I think, again, some people hear the word mindfulness and they think, oh, well, this is like a, kind of like a buzzword, and I don't really know what it means. But I have found for myself, in the way that I relate to food and fuel and, nutrition in my life, that mindfulness is such an important component because, and correct me if I'm wrong here, maybe I'm making an assumption, it's not only these larger phases of our life that we need to pay attention and change the way that we're eating, but even throughout the day, right? Like, on a day that I'm not planning a 3-hour workout, I'm going to need to eat and drink differently than a day that I am, right? And, even you were saying, before you go and exercise, while you are exercising, after you are exercising, if you're not paying attention, if you're not tuned into your body and where your body is at, you're going to miss that moment. You're going to miss that opportunity to repair when it's time to repair. You're going to miss that opportunity to fuel, to put gas in the tank before you're driving down the highway, 50 miles away from a gas station, and you run out of fuel, right? This is okay. Now we're in a bad spot. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit about that mindfulness and that relationship to our bodies, not just on paper in terms of a checklist or measurements to hit, but in terms of qualitative. How do we feel when we're eating right? How do we feel when we're hydrated, as opposed to not being hydrated? Like having that headache you get when you're dehydrated, and you go, wait, oh, yep, that's my alarms going off. I can tell I have that dehydration headache. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to those signals that our body gives us, and how we can start to learn to pay attention to those and then respond accordingly.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for that question. So, um, I think the mindfulness aspect, well, I know the mindful aspect is very, very important. And that's why I recently launched my website called Healthy Hughes Hot Keto, because
Mm-hmm.
um, it's not only about, you know, being a healthy martial artist, but also a lifestyle, right? Food
Yes.
is the fundamental basis for our survival. And I think, like, once we're able to harmonize our health, our
Mm.
fitness, and our our training, that translates to every facet of life, right? So that's why I call myself the Renaissance Sensei, because martial arts for me is not just about going there and going to mat and getting some techniques in, and but it's also about how do I philosophically integrate that this same discipline in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things you mentioned about, people feeling overwhelmed is, I want to say two parts. One, the lack of content, the lack of knowledge in the area, or they
Yeah.
feel that they lack the knowledge in the area. And number two, accountability.
Mm-hmm.
People become accountability when your body starts to feel different. They go to a doctor and they get a diagnosis and they realize, oh, I have to
Mm.
get my stuff together. It
Right.
should always be about prevention, rather than, I mean, intervention is good too, but I feel like prevention is better than cure, right?
Mm. Yes,
And
ma'am.
um, most people, I can speak for myself. I started to pay more attention to my body after when I became in my 40s, because in my 30s I was feeling great and energetic, but then at 40 I began to get all these injuries, and I'm like, what is going on with me? I was training crazily every single day, going hapkido, going to jiu-jitsu, and I wasn't, and I mean, I teach this stuff and I wasn't even um
Mm-hmm.
being mindful about it. But then I realized, you know what, philosophically, this is what you talk about. So you have to really be mindful about how you go about, practicing what you preach, because this is very important. I think that's something that is often neglected during training. Like, oh, you have to get the form right, you have to do the push-ups, you have to do conditioning. And I start seeing real life failures like within myself and in students that will come in to train. They're all like winded, they can't perform well in the black belt test,
Mm-hmm.
they're having cramps and stuff, and then they're getting injured fast. So like you mentioned, there's a lot of um information out there is very overwhelming and misconceiving too as well, like a lot of myths and stuff like that. So I think firstly is to develop that if you are trying to go on a journey, you must have your passport. So look at the fact that you must
Mm-hmm.
have your passport in order for you to perform as an athlete. It doesn't matter if you're a martial artist or, in general, life in general. You should Health and wellness is multifaceted, and the physical body is the vehicle for you to be emotionally well, mentally well, spiritually well, financially well, emotionally well. So you have to take care of your body. How do you take care of it? By having the basics of what it is I need to eat, how I need to eat. You don't have to go to a nutritionist or whatever. Like you
Mm. Right.
should go to if you really want more specific information, you should go to a registered dietitian. Now, I'm a food scientist. I can explain to you, what you should eat, how it works, you know, um, the basic quantities. But if you have a disease or you need a specific guidance, then a registered dietitian will get into like your biometrics and tell you exactly the amount you should eat based on your body type, based on your level of activity, based on your disease or health status. They can tell you all of that. But in general, just having a fundamental basis of, those six basic nutrients that I mentioned,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and then what you should eat within how you should acquire those nutrients, because the food is your medicine. It gives you everything you need if you eat it in the right amounts. And I think what happens, people get caught up in all they have like people that will appeal to you emotionally. Like you will have people putting on like celebrities and stuff and say, "Oh, eat this and you'll lose weight in like 10 days, or drink this and you will be looking
Right.
more
Right.
like, you'll feel energetic, or if you have bloating, you drink this drink and you'll be healed in like 5 days." Like, fast fixes are not the solution. Like
Mm. Yes,
we didn't
ma'am.
get our we didn't you don't get a black belt in martial arts in 5 days. You have to earn that, right? If you're getting that black belt in 5 days, you're buying you're cheating the system, right? So
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
you have to think of life as the diet, like the same way how you put a lot of effort into earning the different colored belts in martial arts. Every level, you become a better version of yourself. You don't start off knowing everything, but
Mm.
you
Mm.
are a student of life. You are a practitioner. So you're never gonna know everything. I don't know everything. I'm still learning, and I have a PhD in food science. I'm still learning
Yes,
because
ma'am.
we are evolving. You're finding different discoveries about foods. Like I grew up in Barbados, and my grandmother, she did it. She wasn't a food scientist, but we would drink a beverage from a bark of a tree called mabi, and it's still
Mm,
consumed. And I did some research on it, and it had like psychedelics in it. It had like all sorts of stuff that medicinal stuff, like natural aspirin that can help with the reducing the blood viscosity for heart disease
wow.
and stuff like that. So like um you just have to um take in consideration cultural stuff, but also being accountable and mindful because there's a lot of information out there, and that's why I decided to kind of get into this whole world of like, how my contributions to martial arts can be. Like I am a professor, I teach nutrition and food science, and this is something that is a great area in the martial arts
Mm-hmm.
space.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I can make a meaningful contribution to just that. And then you mentioned mindfulness. Mindfulness is your ability to focus on one thing at a time without all the distractions. That's why in the chocolate meditation, how you go from, okay, what do you see? What do you smell? What do you taste? I think the hardest part for everyone was just sitting there focusing on the melt. They're like, how long is it gonna take, right? So that's the thing,
Yeah.
like people always want the fast fixes in life, and you don't get to enjoy the journey because you're going there everywhere. And part of being a great martial artist and also being a champion for yourself is to first take care of your body.
Mm-hmm.
That requires you to hydrate, to get rid of toxins, because obviously you're taking in toxins too. You breathe in toxins. Some of the foods you contain toxins, environmental toxins, and you have to have a way of bathing your body inside, and that's how you bathe your body, by drinking water, because you want the nutrients to be transported, but you also want to clean your organs, clean your cells, and eradicate all the waste, and then you feed the cells for you to move, for you to everything you do is require energy, is the reason why we move. The chi, we talk about chi a lot in martial arts. Ki, chi,
Mm-hmm.
qui, that's a life force. Your food is your life force. So if you don't eat the right food, you're going to take away from your life force and longevity. And that's why people become diseased, and then they're trying to counteract that, but the damage is already far too gone. So I'm sorry it was a little long-winded, but I just want to get the points across.
No,
No, I think. Go ahead, sir.
well, I think no, this idea of feeling out your nutrition is something that's lost on most people, and it's kind of a novel idea, but I think it's an important one. When I was in Korea and I was training like, 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, I could tell you exactly what I needed because my body was like, give me this right now. And when I ate it, I felt amazing.
Mhm.
And I remember I came back and I was living with a family friend who was very like new agey and had this very curated diet that was sort of extreme. I felt like, every day just, green drinks and stuff. And it's not necessarily bad, but compared to the amount of nutrition that I needed, was very different. And at the time, I was really getting into jujitsu and I was training every day in jujitsu. And so I was putting a lot of hours, training very hard, and I would come home and I would like slam a Gatorade, and they would go, "Oh, no, 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 don't do that. Drink a cup of water, and then you know, don't eat all this. You just have some vegetables or something." I'm like, if I do what you're asking right now, I'm gonna die. And so the reason why I'm trying to make a segue here from, I think, this idea of being very mindful about your nutrition can help us kind of find a more balanced diet and keep us protected from our own sort of desire to just find simple solutions to
Mm-hmm.
complex
Mm-hmm.
problems. And so my question to you, kind of segued into this, is what are some common mistakes that people make? I had that competitor at a tournament recently that was like, just give this guy a Snicker bar. Like, just give him. He's like falling asleep. He's been sitting here for 6 hours. He needs something to like get him awake. And sure enough, he went out there very fatigued and didn't perform to his best ability, in my opinion. Or my my mom, or not my mom, but this lady who I was living with at the time, who was very, nutrition focused, was like, "Don't drink Gatorade, just drink a glass of water." And I'm thinking, these are kind of, I think, from an athlete's perspective, kind of mistakes. But I'm not a nutritionist, so I don't really know for sure. So what are some mistakes that people make?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but when I was in school, you study for an exam, and then you think you know what you know, and then you have a friend that didn't study, and then you're like, "Did you know this one?" And you start doubting yourself. I don't know if I'm making a point here, but the point is I'm trying to make is that you mentioned when you trained, you know what your body need, right? So you felt lethargic. You just didn't want any green stuff. You wanted to have energy, right? So you were probably craving some carbohydrate or something like that. And so intuitively your body knew what it needed. Now the biggest mistake people make is that they don't do their own research. They go and follow everything on the back on because we have access to a lot of information on the web.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have people who are not even experts in the field giving information to people. So the influencers, they may be able to convince someone like you need to be a fruitarian, or you shouldn't do this or do that. I mean, definitely like for you, John, you mentioned Gatorade because you need electrolytes. You have been sweating all day long after training. Your body is craving salt, right? You're craving the electrolytes because that is important because that's why a lot of times people who may not have a dietitian, a sports nutritionist to tell them what to do, they can die from sudden cardiac death because you don't have enough
Mm-hmm.
salt to pump because your body needs potassium and sodium pumps for your heart to beat. That's why they put IV in you when you get dehydrated because those are salts that your body needs. And so if you're not putting the salts in, you begin to cramp up. Your heart is a muscle that needs to contract. So people can follow from sudden cardiac death or muscle cramps and seizures because they're not getting the electrolytes in. That's the electricity. Your body needs the sodium and potassium electricity for your body to your neurons to work to pump to be active.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not getting those in, it can potentially very dangerous. Now, even with the carbohydrate, you can go into hypoglycemia. That is pretty dangerous. You can if you don't. That's why some persons might get really lethargic and like almost unconscious because
Mm-hmm.
they don't
Mm-hmm.
have the right fuel. Right, your body is operating on empty. Like I mentioned, your body, like if you watched a documentary where people got lost in the forest or somewhere, the first resource to go is the carbohydrate. The second resource is going to be the fat, and the last resource is going to be the protein. That's when they actually begin to die because the ketoacidosis is setting in, right? So your body will still compensate for the lack of energy from the main source of the energy. It's just that you're doing your body more harm than good. So when you see people on those like drink juicing and stuff,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you have to be careful because you're not getting all the nutrients that you require to perform, and that's why sometimes they faint and feel like dizzy head or having like some vertigo because they're not getting the correct nutrients in. And so for example, I could take iron all day long, but if I don't take vitamin C, my body can't use the iron, then I become
Mm-hmm.
anemic.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to know not only what you put in, but how it works. That's where the food scientist myself comes in, right? We have to know what to put in, how it works. So what may work for me may not work for you because we may be culturally from different places. Like when I first moved from Barbados, I wasn't used to high fructose corn syrup. I was used to cane sugar, right? So it tastes different, smell different, So culturally, you might have access to things that you may not like in like John, you mentioned that you lived in Korea for a while. Like those persons those monks and martial who train they drink tea. Tea has higher antioxidants that help with like the heart health, and they eat a lot of nice herbs and stuff in your food. So that thing, healthy carbohydrates and stuff like that. So that's why they're so lean and they're so healthy because they're like not a lot of over processed foods and stuff like that. But they also to get to the energetics of food, they get into like the yin and yang of like what
Mm-hmm.
is hot, what is cold. So they understand the dynamics of energy. So I think like The food is a lot. I can go on and on and on.
No, that's a really salient point that I think a lot of people don't realize. When you live in a certain culture, you tend to eat certain types of food. And if you grew up
Mhm.
eating certain types of food, then you try to transition to a very different diet. It might have certain effects on your body. When I lived in Korea, I only ate Korean food, and wow, my smell was so different. I smelled like sort of vinegary, and I was almost repulsed by my own BO for the first time. And I have some friends who've come to the United States and have eaten American food, and they like get constipation, and it's just that their whole gut biome seems to be different. So I don't know what to do with that information exactly, but it just I think it would be, a lot of people talk about eating, soy, but we're not really typically designed to eat a lot of soy. And, there's a lot of supplements now to kind of get us the nutrition. And I wonder how that might affect our own bodies if it's not something that we're typically used to eating. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so this is where it comes into like more personalized nutrition. So this is where you get into the dietetics of it all. So the science to understand how it works is important, but to also know what each person specifically want is also different. Like I have an identical twin sister, but our requirements are different. She lives in Barbados,
Mm.
I live here. And whenever I go home, I always have gut issues because the microflora is a lot different because 90% of your, I would say 85 to 90% of your immunity is come from your gut. Your actual gut bacteria trains your immune system, right? So
Wow.
cultures eat a lot of fermented foods, maybe like really, really healthy because the gut micro you hear heal your gut. Like, people get bloating from the gut and stuff because the microbiome is very, very important. So what I've started to do now as a I guess older adult is really looking at my metabolic panel to see like where how am I functioning. Like you have to get a very thorough look inside of your body because obviously your body is changing as you age. Your babies might don't have microbes when they're now building an immune system, so that's why they don't really get sick when they put their hands in their mouth because they like, their immune system is like getting adapted to stuff. But when you get older, while they're building the microflora are always dying off because we're aging. And so part of it is really looking at healing your gut. So like things like having your GI map, your gastrointestinal map done to see what is your microbiome and then how you can how you can supplement your diet with probiotics and prebiotics. Probiotics is the bacteria that lives in the gut,
Mm.
and prebiotics is the food that you feed the bacteria to thrive in your gut.
Mm.
Um, and then having a look at your panel, like your lipoprotein, your blood lipids, all your vitamin, your nutrient profile in your blood, all that kind of stuff. That's also very, you need a baseline to see what it is you need to do consistently. And then obviously I focus a lot on the heart health with the chocolate meditation because your
Mhm.
heart is one of the main, is your engine, right? Like it pumps all the nutrients around, you increase your performance and stuff like that. So that also has to be in check too. So I started to look more into my health more internally. I would eat well and stuff, but to see how my diet is performing, I have my annuals and my physicals done to make sure what I'm putting in is actually working to how it's supposed to work. But again, that was also through trial and error where I would be getting injured a lot. I would feel lethargic, I'm like, why am I not performing well? And what I was finding out was that even though I was eating well, sleep is non-negotiable. Sleep,
Mm.
between 7 and 9 hours of sleep, because I don't care how much protein you eat to repair those muscles. If you don't sleep for those 9 hours, it's almost like charging your phone, right? If you want 100% charge, same thing with sleep. If you just sleep 5 hours and think the protein is going to heal you, no, it's not going to do as much because you didn't give your body that time to heal. So
Mm.
health
Mm.
and wellness is very holistic. It's not just putting fuel in your body, it's servicing your body like you service a car. Like you can put gasoline in all day and driving around, but if you don't get it serviced, you don't get checked up. You don't know what pipes it need. You don't know what's wrong with the alignment of your wheels. They may need rotations. You might need a fuel change, might need an engine wash. You have to get more internal information, the diagnostics must be the diagnosis is just as important as just putting the fuel in. So I'm just giving that
Yeah,
analogy of
that's
like,
great. You gotta trickle charge your body phone, you know what I mean? You gotta get the battery doctor.
yeah, so that's very important. So sleep is non-negotiable. Breath work is non-negotiable. That's why I went through it in my chocolate meditation. First,
Hmm.
having your vagus nerve done by the breathing method, then focusing on being focused, meaning that you're not going forward or backward, you're not in the future, you're not in the past, you're just being able to focus on optimizing your energy to become just present with yourself. And then
Hmm.
respecting that food is medicine. So it brings chi to your body. When you put chi in your body, it's aligning all the misalignments that you would have encountered, all the toxins that you ingested or you produced while you're respirating. The chi from the food would then work on how do I align myself, and then you have to understand what's in the food that aligns yourself. There's many medicines in foods that help you to prevent cardiovascular disease, muscle injury, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. But if you don't have a diagnostic, a baseline on what is needed and what is actually working and what is not, then you know um, you're just shooting in the dark. Like you don't know what's going on.
Hmm.
So like the accountability piece is very important. It's not anybody else's fault. It's like you have to become more aware that while there are people out there that can help you, you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable, really understanding your own, doing your own research, becoming vigilant about what you need to know and asking people. So that's why like I really focus my outreach now on presenting very, very um, complicated information in nutrition and food science into something that people can understand and
Right.
relate to, because we don't have that translation. I think that's what most people struggle with the literature, is that the information is so above their head that they get discouraged in actually understanding how the mechanism, how it actually flows. Like if you're doing jujitsu, I can do a arm bar, a bladder, triangle choke all day long. But if I don't, if I can drill that, but if I don't do it in real time, I don't, you never get the experience of
Hmm.
how to move, like how to shift your body, how to compensate, because you just know the fundamentals, but you're not putting it into action. And
Hmm.
so that same thing comes with the nutrition. Like it's not good enough to just know it. You have to put it in action, and then you have to watch the changes, because like you can practice armbar, you get the armbar, and you try to do it on someone, you don't get it the first time, but the more you practice, it becomes intuitive, becomes natural, and then you get the feel of it, and then you're like, okay, I can make modifications. That's the same way how your approach to nutrition and diet works, right? And you have a sensei. You go to a professional, like you talk to a food scientist like myself, or you talk to a nutritionist, right? Because you want to get better. You want to know the how. Just sitting there and going on it and okay, how do I fix my car engine? Okay, get a screwdriver and put a hole in the fuel tank. Okay, do that. And then you drive on the street, your car stop, like because you read it from somewhere. But no, right? So you have to know, you have to know, here's my goals, here's what I want to achieve. Okay. You find a person who can help you achieve those goals. They give you an action plan and then you work on it. It may not happen the first time, it may not happen the second time, but the more you do it, the better you get at it.
So on that note, I think a lot of people know they need to do something to improve their nutrition, and sometimes you see people who are overweight, and it's pretty obvious that if you just eat a little bit less calories, you're going to probably have some, weight loss. But it can be very difficult to do things like that because people are so stuck in their routines. They have the things that they like to eat, the things they like to do, the way they like to exercise. So, what are some action steps that people can take to get started in a healthier life?
Get started.
Do it.
Yes, ma'am.
Get
Yes,
started.
ma'am.
I mean, like I've had those days where I didn't feel like going to practice, but I did it anyways, right? When you get there, you feel better because you're like, if you had stay home, you wouldn't have gained anything at all. If you say you want a black belt, but you don't go to practice, you're gonna just dream it up all day long. You're not gonna get it. You have to align with your goals.
Mhm.
You have to start taking one step at a time. I think what happens is we live in a fast world where it's like no, 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 no. But everything is a journey. Um, you may be overweight, you may not have the nutrition or the health status you want, but it doesn't mean that if you don't do nothing at all, you don't go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Start one step at a time, then you're gonna see very small changes. I
Mm.
never When I first did hot keto, I walked to the door, I saw 20 belts. Like I saw a white all the way up to black belt. I was like, no, I can't do this. Like the first day I was like, this is not for me. But I say, you know what? Did I let 100 push-ups wear me out? No, you got better motivation than this, Cheryl. And every day I would go, and that one day turned into 6 years, and then with 6 years, 7 years, I had a black belt, and I cried because I'm like, I started just with this whole mindset that I couldn't do it. But then every day I said I can do it, and it went from
Mm-hmm.
one
Mm-hmm.
day to 7 years. I'm still continuing, and now I'm practicing other martial arts systems, jiu-jitsu, judo, kind of stuff. So I feel like once you begin the journey, you're gonna still like. I have cheat days where I feel like eating some fried chicken and kale. Like I cheat sometimes. Like I'm like, I'm gonna have a cheat day. I'm gonna have some Cheetos and some
Mm-hmm.
junk food. But then you kind of say, okay, done. I got my fix. Okay, now it's over. So you don't you try to always establish discipline. Like it's like when you go to practice, you're like, I'm gonna rest today. Fine. You give your body what it needs, but then you quickly have to set back and like, okay, what are my goals? And you stick to them. So I'm not saying that you're gonna be always like motivated to do it, but nobody can do it for you. You can't get a black belt from me. I have to take the test, I have to do the conditioning, I have to do all the techniques, and I have to be accountable. Despite whatever is going on in my life, I have to be accountable because if I don't put the work in, I'm never gonna see results. So I think accountability is key. Having tools is key too. So having the tools, first of all, understanding how the tools work, putting it into practice, and keeping yourself accountable is very important.
Mm.
If I can jump in here just
Yes,
to
sir.
kind of wrap all of that up into a beautiful package. I've been sitting and just listening. I'm like, man, there's something really um just really beautiful about this conversation. And again, thank you, Dr. Rock, for sharing all of this with us. And what I'm recognizing here is, I work with a lot of children, not only in the self-defense sphere, but also, I work at this youth center where we are just kind of watching them day to day and, for a couple hours here and there, or other times longer. And something I've been thinking so much about is what we are introduced to in our lives and when we are introduced to it. And to focus what I am trying to say here in one way, which is our discipline, we have these pathways. And one of the pathways is recovery. One of the pathways is fitness. One of the pathways is meditation. And there's all of this kind of interplay between the pathways, but we can get these general points like, okay, recovery, you were talking about how protein, that's your repair, and you can eat protein all day long, but that's going to serve you in a specific way. And it's not necessarily going to serve you in another way. And so to really get a top down picture of what it is that we're talking about here and why I think it's so incredible that we are able to have people like you on this podcast is because in the same way that self-defense, I feel, is almost a human right. Everybody should have the opportunity to learn about their body, learn how to defend their body, learn how to protect themselves from harm. So too should we be sharing this information about health and wellness and nutrition. And Dr. Rock, you mentioned, what's the best way to get started? Well, it's to get started. And I think people, when they hear that, can also be a little discouraged because they're like, but and there's always going to be the excuse. There's always going to be excuses, but I don't know. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And so I'm turning that call to action toward myself in this conversation as well and saying, well, here I am having this conversation with Dr. Rock, with Grandmaster Olds. And, you know, it's part of my job as a teacher, as an instructor, as a leader in my community to do what I can to bring this information to these kids and to these parents that I'm working with and to these people because, right, they're not going to necessarily have the time or the interest. But like you said, Dr. Rock, and like, I'm sure that Grandmaster Rhodes, it's that feeling of stepping in to the dojang or stepping onto the mats for the first time and you just go, I don't know if this is for me. Like, my God, I don't know about this. I don't know if I can do this. But the crucial component is that you're not doing it alone, right? You
Yeah.
look beside you and somebody's there to say, hey, I don't know if I can do this either, but we're in this together now. So let's take a step forward. Let's move forward with this and cheer each other on. And I think that that is such a beautiful thing that can maybe come out of this conversation as we move forward is recognizing, hey, yeah, not everybody's going to have all the answers to all the nutritional questions, in the world, but if we can be that mirror for each other, if we can look at ourselves every day and say, I have been feeling pretty crampy the past 2 days. And then my wife says, well, yeah, it's because you had like one glass of water in the past 3 days. We gotta hold each other accountable. We gotta be able to speak that common language, like you alluded to as well, Dr. Rock, right? Like so many people are intimidated by maybe the jargon or the way that this is communicated to them. But if we can break it down into simple exercises and say, hey, a friend of mine in Grandmaster Olds, Mr. John McCool, we were texting months ago about hydration, and he's like, Mr. Trader, just try drinking a liter of water every day for a week and just see what happens. He's like, it doesn't have to be some grand revelation. It doesn't have to be some crazy, like, wow. He's like, but just notice how you feel right now. Drink a ton of water every day for a week, and then check in next week, same time, same day, and just see, like, how do you feel? And having permission to experiment like that, I think, is so important. And then to be able to have these kind of check-ins with an expert to say, hey, here's what I've been feeling. Could you tell me a little bit more about this? And Dr. Rock, I guess one last thing here. I love what you said about if you want to go on a journey, if you want to go anywhere, you need that passport, right? If you're traveling domestically, you need a license, right? Like at the very least, you need that key to open up the journey ahead of you. And I love what you said about health and wellness and nutrition being your passport to life, right? Like if you're not taking care of your body, your your body's gonna die. Like it's like if you're not taking care of it, then you are stopping yourself from experiencing the life that you could be living. And I think that's true about martial arts training. I think that's true about fitness and nutrition. And I think it's true about so many things. So anyway, I think to connect those dots there and say that, yes, we're getting granular and we're talking nutrition, but really we're talking about taking care of ourselves, taking care of each other,
Self-defense,
you know?
self-defense,
Mhm.
self-defense. Mhm.
Absolutely.
So I know your time is precious, Dr. Rock, and I really appreciate you sharing some of your morning with us. And you've been incredibly diplomatic throughout this, so I'm gonna try to throw a little fire starter underneath you to kind of end with. What are some of the biggest nutrition myths you wish people would let go of?
Oh my gosh, there's so many myths. There's, like I think many of it is a fad diet. Like if
Mm,
you there's so many misconceptions about fat. Like they'll say things like um don't eat, gluten, or maybe don't eat carbohydrates, or I think the general term is the fad diet. Like anything
mm,
that works too fast without any level of effort is not going to work. It will work
Mm,
short term,
mm,
but not long term,
mm,
right? You just can't put a band-aid over a leak. you have to do the internal work to fix it. And I think a fad diets are one of the biggest misconceptions. Like, all processed foods are bad. Now, I'm a food scientist and I teach food processing. Cutting is a process, washing is a process, boiling is a process. But because you don't contextually understand the term process, there's various levels of processing, but the fact is
Right.
the negative connotation with different things can result in you truly experiencing um, or visualizing what your health and wellness can look like, because there's not a one size shoe fit all. So I think fad diets is one big issue, and just really the misconceptions of food in general, and really understanding for yourself that even though there's a lot of information out there, you should vet what you see, because this is your body, this is your life, this is your experience, and if you're in doubt, throw it out. That's how I see it.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I hope
Yeah.
I answered your question,
No,
Grandmaster.
that's great. I think that's a great note to end on. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Dr. Rock, and these have been some important points that have been made, and I think things for our listeners to think about as they train.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and I'm also practicing these same principles too, and I'm still learning. So it's universal. So I really appreciate you, Grandmaster Oles, and Jesse, for inviting me onto your podcast. Like you mentioned, there's everything is interconnected through one way, a path, a door. And even if it seems remote, it leads you back to one place, which is yourself. Like,
Hmm.
alignment
Hmm.
is very, very important. You can go in circles all day long, it's still going to come at the same starting point. Have to start.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'll be happy to, participate again in the future.
Yes,
Hmm.
ma'am.
You want me to close this out, sir?
Yes, sir.
All right. So, Dr. Rock, thank you so much again for joining us and sharing your wisdom and helping us understand just how this health and nutrition and these concepts shape not only our training, which we kind of started the conversation on, but our overall quality of life. As you said, it is all interconnected. And just like anything in our lives, we're going to get out of it what we give. So your guidance reminds us that discipline isn't just something that we practice on the mat. You know, you're not practicing nutrition only when you sit down for breakfast. You're practicing nutrition all day long. It's something we live through the choices that we make every day throughout our day. To our listeners, thank you so much for joining us. If today's conversation inspired you, challenged you, or gave you something new to think about, I know that it certainly did all those things for me. Please share this episode and continue the dialogue with your fellow one way practitioners, with your communities, whether it's martial arts or otherwise. As always, let's remember to stay focused, stay intentional, and keep walking that path that one way.
If you enjoyed that podcast, please consider liking and subscribing to our YouTube channel, as well as hitting the notification bell.